There are some stories that aren't just stories. They feel less like something you read in a book and more like something that's been woven into your own DNA. They cut through thousands of years of noise and history, and they find you right where you are. They speak to a place deep inside you, a place of quiet struggle, a place of suffocating hope, a place of absolute, on-the-floor desperation. This is one of those stories. On the surface, it's about sickness, but really it's about a kind of healing that goes so much deeper than the body. It's a story that takes place in a huge crowd, but it's really about the crushing loneliness of one person who felt completely and utterly invisible. It's a story about a man named Jesus, but we see it all through the eyes of a woman whose name we never even get to learn, a woman known only by the thing that was destroying her. She is the woman with the issue of blood, and her story, tucked away in just a few lines of the Gospels, holds one of an incredible lesson in what real desperate faith actually looks like. For 12 years, she was a ghost. For 12 years, every single day was defined by her pain. For 12 years, she poured every last thing she had into finding a cure, only to have it all make her worse. Have you ever felt utterly trapped by something you couldn't fix? This is the story of a woman who had every reason on earth to give up, but instead she chose one final desperate act of faith that would shatter the chains that held her. It's the story of a touch that broke every rule, and an encounter that offered her not just a cure, but a complete rescue. To really understand the courage of what she did, I think you have to understand the sheer horror of the prison she was in. For 12 long years, that's 4,380 days. Each one a carbon copy of the last, marked by this relentless soul-crushing sickness. The Bible just calls it an issue of blood, a constant hemorrhage. Medically, it was a severe gynecological disorder, but in her world, it was so much more than a diagnosis. It was a life sentence. First, just imagine the physical toll, the constant weakness, the exhaustion, the chronic pain that was her shadow every single day. The Gospel of Mark tells us, with this kind of raw honesty, that she had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors. In that time, the cures were often just a mix of superstition and torturous procedures. We can only guess what she went through, but the words are clear: she only got worse. The very people who were supposed to help her only deepened her misery, and then there was the financial ruin. The scripture says she spent all she had. Picture that. It's a slow, agonizing bleed out of her entire life, selling a piece of jewelry from her mother, letting go of land that had been in her family for generations. Every coin, every last bit of security just fed into this furnace of false hope until she was left with nothing. Not just sick, but completely destitute. But as devastating as all that was, it doesn't even touch the social and spiritual prison she lived in. To get this, we have to understand her world was governed by the purity laws from the book of Leviticus. These laws weren't about hygiene, they were about being ritually ready to be in the presence of God. They drew a hard line between clean and unclean. And according to those laws, a woman with her condition was ceremonially unclean. This wasn't a judgment that she had sinned. It was a state of being that made her incompatible with the sacred spaces of her community. And her uncleanness was contagious. The law was brutal. Anything she touched became unclean. Anyone who touched her became unclean. A chair she sat on, a cup she drank from, all of it was considered defiled by her presence. The label wasn't just a status, it was a brand on her soul, a constant reminder that her very presence was a problem for others. Think about what that actually means for a human being. It's a life in quarantine. She was a ghost in her own town. Friends who once hugged her would now cross the street to avoid her. A simple handshake, a shared meal, all forbidden. She couldn't touch her own children. She couldn't embrace her husband. She was this walking source of contamination. Her prison had invisible walls, built out of fear and religious law. The marketplace, the center of community, would have been a place of sheer terror for her, where any accidental bump could get her shamed and thrown out. And maybe the most painful part of it all, she was cut off from God, at least in the way her people understood it. She was barred from the temple. The one place she went to meet with God was closed to her. Imagine the anguish. For 12 years, she wasn't just sick, she was spiritually homeless. This was the pit of her despair, a complete and total isolation of her body, her community, and her spirit. She was forgotten, invisible, untouchable. Desperation has a sound. It's the silence in a room after you've run out of options. It's the echo of your own breathing when you're convinced there is no way out. For 12 years, this was the soundtrack to her life. The doctors had failed. Her money was gone. Her community had rejected her. Her religion had exiled her. By every earthly measure, her story was over. But then a new sound started to break through that suffocating silence. It probably started as a whisper, a rumor carried on the dusty roads by travelers and fishermen. A new name was on people's lips, Jesus of Nazareth. You have to imagine how news moved back then in a world of human voices, of stories told around fires. And the stories about this man were impossible. These weren't polite stories of gentle philosophy. They were visceral, shocking accounts of divine power breaking into the broken world. They weren't just about a wise teacher. They were stories of raw power. Maybe she first overheard it from a neighbor. Did you hear? The blind man, the one who begged by the road, they say this Jesus touched his eyes and now he sees. Or maybe she heard men in the market, their voices filled with awe. A leper came to him, a man whose flesh was rotting off, and Jesus didn't pull away. He touched him, and the man was made clean. That one word, clean, would have pierced her heart like a dagger. Clean, a state she hadn't known for over a decade. A word that meant freedom, acceptance, life. Every story was like a seed of hope planted in the dead soil of her despair. He casts out demons. He calms storms. The reports painted a picture of a man who had authority over the very things that were destroying her life. This wasn't just another doctor with another useless cure. This was different. This was hope that felt dangerously real. And it lit a fire in her, this desperate, audacious idea. An idea born from the conviction that if this man's power was so immense, so compassionate, that he would touch the untouchable, then maybe she didn't need to make a big scene. Maybe she didn't need to explain her 12 years of shame. Mark's gospel tells us what she was thinking, what she kept repeating to herself like a mantra of desperate faith. If I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. This wasn't a casual wish. This was a conclusion she reached at the end of herself. She had tried every human system, and they had all failed her. Now she would place her trust in someone entirely different. That one thought became her whole world. It was terrifying because it meant she had to act. She had to leave the shadows. She had to risk being publicly shamed and condemned for breaking the law. But that whisper of hope had become a roar in her heart, and it was finally louder than the voices of fear. Jesus was her last hope, and she was going to reach for him. The day came. She heard Jesus was nearby on his way to the house of a synagogue leader named Jairus, whose 12-year-old daughter was dying. The irony is just staggering. The number of years of her suffering was the exact age of this little girl. One had been living a kind of death for 12 years. The other was at the very end of her life. A huge crowd was following Jesus. The Gospels say they pressed and thronged him, giving you this sense of chaotic, crushing energy. For this woman, that crowd was a terrifying sea of potential accusers. Every person she bumped against was a person she was technically defiling. At any moment, someone could recognize her, see the sickness on her face, and scream that one word that would destroy her: unclean. Summoning every last ounce of strength in her body, she stepped into the chaos. Imagine her view. She's staying low, trying to be invisible. Her world is just a forest of legs and dusty robes. The air was thick with dust and sweat, and the murmur of 1,000 conversations, a chaotic symphony of human life from which she had been excluded for so long. The pushing and shoving threatens to just swallow her. Every jostle sends a jolt of pure terror through her. Is this it? Did someone see me? But her focus was absolute. She wasn't looking at faces. She was looking for one man, and specifically, the very edge of his clothes. She wasn't aiming for his hand. She was aiming for the hem of his garment. This detail is so important. Devout Jewish men wore tassels called tzitzit on the corners of their outer garments. These were a physical reminder of God's commandments. Symbolically, the hem represented the person's authority and holiness. For some, there was even a belief that the Messiah would come with healing in his wings, and the word for wings could also mean the corners of a garment. Whether she knew all of that, we don't know. But she knew that part of his clothing represented who he was, and in her mind, if she could just make contact with that fringe, the power that lived in him would be enough. It had to be. Inch by painful inch, she pushed her way forward, her heart pounding. This wasn't a polite request. This was a secret mission, a silent, desperate lunge of faith. She was trying to steal a blessing, convinced her own need was too small and too shameful to announce. Finally, she's close. She can see the back of his robes. The crowd pushes, and for a second, she's shoved back. She fights against her own weakness, against the current of the crowd. This is her only chance. It's now or never. With one final desperate motion, she reaches out her trembling hand. Her fingers brush against the fabric, against the knotted threads of the tassel. The instant her fingers made contact, it happened. Not slowly, not a gradual improvement. It was immediate. The Bible says she felt it in her body. After 12 years of that constant draining flow, there was sudden, absolute stillness. Can you imagine that moment? The shock of it. The sudden absence of the pain and weakness that had been her entire reality for over 4,000 days. A surge of warmth, of life, flooding back into her. It was a private miracle, a secret explosion of power that only she knew about. For a split second, there must have been this wave of pure, overwhelming relief. It worked. It actually worked. Her ordeal was over. All she had to do was melt back into the crowd and disappear. She got what she came for. But then Jesus stopped. He came to a dead halt. The whole procession stumbled to a stop behind him. He turned, his eyes scanning the sea of faces, and then he asked a question that sounded completely absurd. Who touched my clothes? His own disciples were baffled. Peter, always the one to speak up, basically said, "Master, look at this. The crowd is crushing you from every side, and you're asking, who touched me?" It was like standing in a hurricane and asking which raindrop just hit you. But Jesus was insistent. He kept looking, searching. He said, "Someone touched me, for I noticed that power had gone out from me." This just reveals something extraordinary. In the middle of 100 accidental bumps, he felt one single touch that was different. It wasn't just a physical touch, it was a touch of faith. It was a touch that made a demand on his divine power, and he felt it leave him. He wasn't some magic lamp you could just rub. He was actively, personally engaged. He felt the pull of her desperate belief. For the woman, this was the moment her relief turned to sheer terror. Her secret was out. The miracle she tried to get in secret was about to become a public spectacle. He was looking for her. The crowd was now silent, watching. There was nowhere to run. She knew she couldn't hide. The woman, realizing she couldn't escape, came forward. The Bible says she was trembling. This was it. She was about to confess everything in front of the entire crowd. She had, according to the law, made every single person she'd bumped into on her way to him unclean, including Jesus himself. She was risking being shamed, condemned, and rejected. She fell at his feet, an act of total surrender. And right there in front of everyone, the disciples, the crowd, the important synagogue leader, she told him the whole truth. She confessed the shameful secret she had carried for 12 years, the loneliness, the despair, and what drove her to do what she did. The crowd must have held its breath. What was he going to do? Rebuke her for breaking the law? For interrupting his urgent mission? Jesus looked down at the woman shaking at his feet, and he didn't see an unclean lawbreaker. He didn't see an interruption. He saw a person. He saw her 12 years of suffering, her courage, and her unbelievable faith. And he spoke to her, not with anger, but with a tenderness that must have just shattered her. He started with one word, a word that changed her entire existence. Daughter. It's the only time in the Gospels he's recorded calling any woman daughter, not woman, which was a normal, respectful way to speak. He called her daughter. In that one word, he erased her identity as an outcast and personally welcomed her back into the family of God. He didn't pull her aside to whisper this healing word. He declared it for all to hear, turning her moment of greatest potential shame into her moment of greatest public honor. He declared that she wasn't a pariah to be shunned, but a beloved child. Then he told her the real source of her miracle. He wanted her and everyone to understand. It wasn't magic. It wasn't his clothes. He said, "Your faith has made you well." He gave the credit back to her. It was her trust, her desperate, determined action that connected with the power of God. He affirmed her. And finally, he gave her a blessing for her future. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering. The phrase "go in peace" is so much more than goodbye. It's a pronouncement of shalom, of complete well-being. It meant not just that her body was fixed, but that her life was being made whole again, emotionally, socially, and spiritually. He didn't just cure her body, he restored her dignity. He didn't just stop the bleeding, he healed her soul. His public declaration meant that no one could ever question her status again. She was clean, she was whole, she was free. So what does this mean for us? This story isn't just history. It's a living blueprint for what faith actually is. First, we learn about desperate faith. This woman's faith wasn't polite or patient. It was messy, urgent, and born from the ashes of total hopelessness. She had reached the end of every other rope. Sometimes we think of faith as this calm, serene thing. But this story shows us that the most powerful faith often ignites when we have nothing left to lose. It's the faith that says, "This is my only chance," and acts on it. It's a faith that isn't afraid to be undignified, to push through crowds, to break the rules. Her story gives all of us permission, when we feel like we are at the end of ourselves, to know that God isn't put off by our desperation. In fact, He's often most attentive to the cry that comes from that deep, broken place. Second, this story teaches us that faith is an action, not just an idea. She didn't just sit at home believing Jesus could heal her. Her belief forced her to move. It propelled her out of her prison into that terrifying crowd and into physical contact with Jesus. There's a huge difference between agreeing that something is true and staking your entire life on it. It's easy to say, "I believe," but it's another thing entirely to crawl through a crowd risking everything. What is our issue of blood? A secret struggle with fear, a financial weight that's crushing us, a broken relationship that makes us feel like an outcast? This story challenges us. What is our act of faith? What tangible step do we need to take to move toward hope? Third, we see this stunning picture of Jesus' compassion and his focus on the one. He was in the middle of a massive crowd on his way to an urgent appointment with an important person. He was, by any human logic, too busy. Yet he felt the single faint touch of one anonymous, outcast woman, and he stopped everything. He quieted the whole crowd to turn his full attention to the one person everyone else had ignored. This tells us that to God, no one is just a face in the crowd. He is intimately aware of the individual cry, the personal struggle, the secret reach. Our pain, no matter how hidden or shameful we think it is never insignificant to him. And finally, and I think this is the most important part, we learn the difference between being cured and being made whole. The woman came for a physical cure. She got it instantly, but Jesus wasn't content to let her just slip away with that. If he had, she would have been physically healed, but still carrying all the shame and fear of her past. By stopping and engaging her, he offered her something so much bigger: wholeness. The Greek word here, sozo, means to heal, but it also means to save, to rescue, to make whole. When he called her daughter, he restored her identity. When he said, "Your faith has made you well," he restored her dignity. When he said, "Go in peace," he restored her future. Wholeness is when the wound is no longer the center of your story. It's when the scar becomes a testament to the healing. Reaching out to Jesus doesn't just fix our problems. It restores our personhood. It takes our deepest wounds and transforms them into a testimony of grace. This story is a powerful reminder that no one is too broken, too lost, or too insignificant for a life-changing encounter. It's a message of hope that is as real today as it was 2,000 years ago. I would love to hear from you. If you feel comfortable and safe, share a piece of your own story or a struggle in the comments below. Let's create a community of support and encouragement right here. You are not alone in this fight. And if this story has given you even a small glimmer of hope, please subscribe for more testimonies of God's incredible power to transform lives. The story of the woman with the issue of blood starts in the darkest shadows of human experience in sickness, poverty, and soul-crushing isolation. For 12 years, her identity was her affliction. She was the unclean one. But her story doesn't end there. It ends in the light, with a new identity spoken over her by the Son of God himself, daughter. She came to Jesus hoping to just touch the edge of his robe, to steal a secret cure. She left with so much more. She left with her health, her dignity, her community, and a peace that she hadn't known for over a decade. Her journey is a reminder that our deepest needs are never a nuisance to God. He sees past our shame and our fear, and he responds, not to our perfection, but to our faith, even a trembling, desperate, last-ditch faith. It teaches us that the goal of this life of faith isn't just to be cured of our problems, but to be made whole. It's a call for us to reach out, even from the crowd, even from our weakest moment, and touch the one who can turn our longest night into a brand new day. For her story is our story, a testament to the profound truth that even the faintest touch of faith is met with the boundless restorative power of love.